I'm Tana French, and this is the story behind my stories.
You're listening to the Author Stories Podcast, bringing you the story behind the stories and the storytellers.
Margaret White,
Terry Brooks,
Sheena Kamal,
Matthew Quick,
JT Ellison,
Walt D. Williams,
Brad Thor,
Corey Doctorow,
Brandon Sanderson,
Robin Mott,
Ernest Klein, Jim Butcher,
Sherwin Harris.
Visit hankgarner.com for archives of all the shows. Today's guest is
Tana French.
Today's episode is sponsored by editor Ellen Campbell. Authors, if you are looking for someone to help shape your words into what you originally intended them to be, Ellen can help you do that. Ellen is one of the most sought-after indie editors out today, and she is one of the best. I've used her. So many other people in the community have used her. There's a link to her website in the show notes. I'll be talking more about her as the month goes on. Also, thanks to R.J. Panero, his upcoming book, Avenue of Regrets, is an engrossing psychological thriller coming up in November. We're going to be talking about it more this month and talking with R.J. Thanks to him for sponsoring the show. As always, after the show, there's an audiobook clip from Richard Gleaves, the Jason Crane series. Well, thanks for joining me again for the Author Stories Podcast, where I bring you the story behind the stories and the storytellers. Today, I'm super excited to have Tana French on the show with me today. She has a brand new book called The Witch Elm, and this is one of the best mystery suspense thrillers that I've read this year. So I'm super excited to talk to you today. Tana, welcome to the show.
Thanks, and thank you very much for having me on.
Tana, we begin each show with the same question, and that question is, what is your first memory of wanting to be a writer or storyteller?
Oh, okay, this is actually an easy one because I can remember it. Must have been like 6, and my dad used to read to me every night, and he was reading me The Wind in the Willows. And he read me the sentence that I'm going to get it wrong, but it's something like, he had never seen a river before, that sleek, sinuous, full-bodied animal. And I went, wow, look what words can do. Like everything up until then had been much more standard kids books. You know, it's Dr. Seuss, it's great fun. But it didn't have that power behind it with what you can do with words. And I fell in love with it right there. And I think that's all of this comes from my dad deciding to read me The Wind in the Willows.
I absolutely love that. Those early experiences and influences cannot be minimized, but they also can't be replaced. There's something about that first thing that awakens the gift inside you. Those are magical experiences.
Oh, absolutely, absolutely. And again, here it is, and it's how many years later, and I still remember that. I still remember where I was.
I love that. Were you a big reader as a kid after that fact, and as you're kind of growing into yourself? Were books a big part of your growing up?
Oh, man, yes. I was a total immersion reader. You know, one of those kids who you give them a book and they're just gone. They're not in the real world until they've finished the last page. That was me. And we were lucky we had trees in our garden, so I would go up the tree with an apple and a book, and I was not coming down until that book was finished. I would love to still do that, you know, but when you're a grown-up, there's real life, and there's, you know, your own kids who need stuff, and you can't just vanish into a book in the same way. I would love to do that again.
Yeah, I was a similar kid like that. They would just get completely lost. And, you know, as you get grown, I was having a conversation with another writer yesterday, and she said that when she was a kid that she had books that she would read over and over and over again. And she misses that experience of just like finding that familiar, character or setting and just getting lost in it over and over again. And, you know, and then as you get older, your to be read pile is huge, and you start realizing, you know, that the mortality of everything, and there's not enough time to read everything. And there's something about those innocent days that you could just get lost in a story.
Oh, I still reread those sometimes because some of them you kind of have to go back to because there's still more in there. Like I have read Watership Down, I don't even know how many times, starting when I was a kid. And I think I probably got I don't even know what percent, maybe a third of it, because you can't when you're 6 or 7. You're not getting the deeper political and societal undertones. But I go back to it and I reread it, and the language is still as unbelievable as it was the first time, and there's more in it every time. So I still do. I feel guilty about ignoring the to be read pile, but every now and then it still has to be done.
Well, and those stories,
It
does. And those stories like Watership Down really show you the way that stories and words can be sneaky and subversive, because you've got these cute animals and there's some like really heavy stuff going on behind there.
Oh, yeah, and he layers it so well that you never for a moment question either that you are in the real world of the animals or that this is vital and important and the stakes are really high. I mean, there's a moment in there that still sends chills down my spine. Watership Down, there's the moment where they're in the ditch and they think it's a black rabbit calling Bigwig. That still sends chills down my spine.
Right. Exactly. I loved that book was kind of moved you so deeply because I feel threads of that in your books, that sense of dread couched in idyllic settings. Sometimes there's this really weird juxtaposition that makes things more suspenseful, more impactful when you have these contrasts. Is that something that you think about when you're writing?
I think it kind of comes out automatically. I don't really think about it very much when I'm writing, but I like books as a reader and as a writer as well, where things are layered, where things aren't quite what they seem, where there's always more to it. There's always a mystery. There's always a hidden thing. And I think that for that, the obvious place to start is with something that either it is idyllic in itself or else the narrator, your point of view character, sees it as idyllic. Because nothing's ever quite that simple. There may be moments in life that really are as pure and idyllic and utterly happy as they seem, but no place, especially, like no setting, can ever be purely that, because settings are always charged up with so many different people's memories and so many different people's experiences, and those aren't all going to be the same, and they're not all going to be purely happy and charmed and peaceful. And so when you start peeling back that setting, that's when it gets interesting, when you start to see the layers. But I think you're right, and it heightens the contrast when you start with something that on the surface seems very innocent and very harmless.
And your newest book, The Witch Elm, really messed me up, because you turned the narrative on its head. And I mean that with all love and respect. But before
That's a compliment,
yeah, it is a compliment. Trust me, it's a compliment. But you really turned the narrative structure on its head. But I don't want to get too far ahead of us. We're going to come back to The Witch Elm in just a minute. But how did you get started writing? And what was the catalyst that made you write that first book that got published? Well,
I wrote a lot when I was a kid and when I was a teenager. I mean, short stories and your standard really dreadful teenage poetry. But it sort of went by the wayside when I trained as an actor and went into acting, and it kind of went. But then, I mean, acting, you're never going to get the gigs lining up neatly unless you're, Judi Dench or somebody. And I had a few weeks off between shows, and I went and worked on an archaeological dig, because I've always been completely fascinated by archaeology, which I think makes sense for somebody who's fascinated by mystery as well. It's the same process. It's getting clues and piecing them together. So I got a few weeks' work on an archaeological dig, and there was a wood not far away from the dig, and I was thinking, God, that would be a great place for kids to play. And then I think this is what differentiates the mystery writer from the normal person. One day I thought, so what if 3 kids ran in there to play and only one came out, and he had no memory of what had happened to the other 2? Like, what's that going to do to his mind as he grows up, knowing the solution is in there, but he can't find it? And then what if he became a detective and a murder case drew him back to that wood? So I kind of scribbled the idea down on a piece of paper and went off to do the next show and forgot it existed. But like a year later, I was moving flat and going through papers and found this piece of paper with like coffee stains on it under a pile of phone bills, and went, oh, I really want to know what happens with that. And it occurred to me that, well, nobody else was going to write it for me. There was only one way I could find out what happened in this story. And I'd never tried to write a book before, so I did not think there was any good likelihood that I could actually do it. But I figured I could probably write maybe one scene and then another scene, and then, oh my gosh, look, I have a full chapter. And then after a while, I found myself actually turning down acting work because I wanted to finish this book. And if you know any actors, like, they don't turn down work. You just don't do it. So all of a sudden, it hit me that I was serious about making this work. And I'm still kind of going, whoa, how did it get here from there?
Oh, that's amazing. That's amazing. So when you finished the novel, the story that just possessed you, that made you turn down work to pursue, what was the process like of getting a publisher and getting it out to the world? Was it what you expected? Was it harder, easier than you expected?
It was actually much easier than I expected. I was really lucky because I knew somebody who worked for an Irish publishing house, and I said, come here, this is not a business thing. This is just as a friend. I've got 4 chapters. Would you read this and tell me if I'm onto something here or if I should stick this under my bed and forget it ever happened? And she came back going, can I send this to our UK branch? And I went, can you wet the ability? Yes, thank you. And she did. And they came back saying they were interested. So, and I said, well, I need an agent. This isn't, I have no idea about this world. I have no idea how to negotiate this. And they very kindly told me who would be a good agent to contact. And it turned out to be not just a good agent to contact, but a man of pure magic. Like, this is like having Dumbledore for your agent. Darley Anderson is magic. And then they ended up being my publisher for a long time, and things kind of went from there. But I was very lucky. I think every now and then you get something like that in life where the stars just align and you hit the right desk at the right time and things fall into place.
What do you think drew you to these types of stories, these suspenseful mysteries with, that have us biting our nails and, leave us a little unsettled throughout? What is it about those types of stories that really excites you?
Well, I just like mysteries. I always have, and not necessarily murder mysteries, but all kinds, like fiction, non-fiction, solved, unsolved. One of my earliest memories, again from that stage when I must have been about 6, is reading something for school that was a story of the Marie Celeste, the ghost ship Marie Celeste, kind of found drifting with all the crew gone, and thinking, right, when I die, I am asking God what happened to them. And I just love mysteries. I
love that so much.
It's a definite plan. But I really am interested in mysteries. And I think it's one of the things that makes us human. Animals don't really care very much about mystery for its own sake. Like, if they find some kind of mystery, most animals will go, okay, can I eat it? Is it dangerous? No, move on. But human beings, we care not just about the solution to the mystery, because if that was all it was, everybody would read the first chapter of a mystery novel and skip straight to the end. We care about the process of finding that solution. We care, there's something we find through that process. And I think, for me, it's not just the whodunit element, because, again, I could skip straight to the end for that. It's the biggest mystery of all is human beings, how the human mind works. And something as huge and as devastating as a murder throws all that into high relief. For anybody who's touched by it, that's got to be something so incredibly intense that it brings out all kinds of things that you didn't realize were there, that it shines a light on things that were probably more comfortably in the shadows and that now have to be faced and dealt with. Not just for, the victim and the murderer, but also for their families, for the detectives, for witnesses, for suspects, for anybody who is in any way touched by these ripples. And I think that's really interesting as a kind of crucible of human nature. I think it's a good point to start if you're interested in exploring people.
Right. And you've gone on to publish, I've lost count, 6 books previous to this one now.
Yeah.
The 7th. Okay.
Yeah.
So we talk a lot about genre tropes and the tools that we have in our toolbox for writing in certain genres.
Yeah.
So for instance, a fantasy author may have orcs and trolls and wizards and the magic rings and this sort of thing, and those are in his or her toolbox. And we all kind of start with these same tools, but tell vastly different stories. And I believe that that's because of the human element that comes in, that we're all telling human stories about the human condition, how we interact with each other. Yeah. And we just couch it in different things. But murder mysteries and thrillers, are so broad in scope. You can tell all kinds of stories, in this. And with your new book, you have really, the new book is The Witch Elm. In this new book, you have taken the standard setup, that we expect in a book like this, and you've turned it around on us. Tell us what the inspiration was for this book, first off, and then we'll get into, kind of some of the nuts and bolts.
Yeah, my editor calls it a murder mystery turned inside out, which I really like that. I think that I had looked at the whole process of a murder investigation from a detective's viewpoint 6 times, but I kept coming back to all the other viewpoints involved. You've got so many other people. You've got suspects, witnesses, perpetrators, victims, and I kept thinking about how different this process must look to them. For the detective, they're right at home in the middle of all the procedural stuff. They're controlling it, they're driving it, it's a source of power, it's a way to reimpose order onto chaos. But from all those other perspectives, it's got to be basically the opposite. It's something that takes away control rather than conferring it. It's something that comes into your life and just turns it upside down. And it has to be terrifying because you would never know quite where you are within it. What is your role within this? And I wanted to give a voice to all those other perspectives, experiment with those. And Toby Hennessy, the narrator, at various points in the book, he's all of them. Oh, sorry, I didn't really answer the question about where the idea came from, did I? That was, sorry, I didn't went off on a tangent.
That's okay.
I've been thinking like a lot about luck and empathy, and how being lucky in some area of your life can kind of impair your ability to understand that other people have very different experiences and that those are equally real. Like my most obvious example that I've been using is I had a happy, loved childhood. And I think in some ways that when I got a bit older, when I got to be a teenager, if somebody would tell me something about a really terrible childhood, there was a small part of me that was going, it can't have been quite that bad, surely. They've got to be exaggerating. Not that I didn't believe the person, but that it was so far outside my frame of reference that I just couldn't take it in as real. Now, obviously, I grew up and I started realizing that my frame of reference is not, in fact, everybody's, and that their reality has equal weight and deserves that.
Sure. Yeah.
But I started thinking about, okay, what about somebody who's been lucky in every area of life, who's always drawn the high card, whatever that is in every area? He's not only, coming from a happy, loved childhood, he's from an affluent family, he's straight, white, male, intelligent, physically and mentally healthy, good-looking. Basically, he's on the right side of every coin flip. What's that going to do with his ability or even his awareness of empathy towards people who have had entirely different experiences? How's that going to affect his ability to accept that their experiences are different and are real? And then what's going to happen to him if at some point his luck turns and he is no longer in that position of playing life on the easiest difficulty setting? How's he going to cope with that, and what will it do?
Man, and you, in this character of Toby, all of those things that you described about him, how he seems to be perfect and has everything just laid out before him, on a silver platter. And on the surface, it seems like we should love this guy. He's the classic golden boy. protagonist. He's got everything wonderful that you ought to love about a character, but immediately I'm distrustful of him. What does that say about where we are in society, do you think? And why is it that we are distrustful of him, when he seems to have everything going for him? Why don't we feel empathy for Toby, even as he is trying to understand empathy?
Well, I deliberately made him not a nasty guy. This is not a guy with a mean streak. This is not a guy who's ever deliberately cruel. He's a good guy.
Exactly.
And yet, in spite of that, you're right, he is not trustworthy. And I think we've reached a point where we realize that Toby's viewpoint, the viewpoint of the Golden Boy, has been taken as the default narrative, the ultimate reliable narrative, for a really long time. And anything else has been seen as a deviation from that. Probably not reliable, maybe interesting, maybe a bit mysterious, maybe a bit exotic or esoteric, but not the default narrative. And we're starting to be more aware of that and to go, hang on a second, is there a solid reason why his narrative should be the default, should be the ultimate objective narrative, should be considered to be intrinsically reliable or not? And so we are, I think, primed to go, okay, hang on a second, you're going to have to prove yourself a little bit before I accept your narrative as intrinsically correct. And I think that's a good thing. We should be questioning.
So we find Toby as this golden boy turned distrustful protagonist, and like you said earlier, we normally see a story like this, and we're looking at the mystery through the eyes of a detective or someone. A lot of times, very flawed characters. But we learn to trust them. We believe that in spite of their flaws, they're going to win the day and they are going to solve this thing. And then we start to love those characters kind of because of their flaws a lot of times. And we can name any number of those detective narrators that could fit the bill. But we find Toby not in that situation. We find him as the victim of a crime, which is the first thing that really turns the story on its head. Why did you decide to have us see this story through Toby's, not only his eyes, but his situation?
See, I write first person kind of by default. It's my automatic way of working. I think it's coming from an acting background. Again, seeing the story through one character's eyes is just the way I'm naturally inclined. But I also thought this was what I was interested in, was the fact of this guy who has always considered himself to be the default narrative, basically, and all of a sudden he's not anymore. He's not, in fact, physically or mentally healthy. He's been beaten up badly. He's got traumatic brain injury. He's got post-traumatic stress disorder. His mind and his body are no longer reliable places, and he's devastatingly aware of this. And this shift from his utter trust in himself and the world, his utter taking for granted that his mind, his body, the world are all safe places, they're all benign, into going, wait, this is quicksand. Everything around me is quicksand and is dangerous and cannot be trusted. That was what I found interesting, and that was what I was interested in exploring for an audience. And then what do you do if you're suddenly put into a situation, as he is, where there's this murder investigation going on, and he feels that if he can find out what happened, it might somehow make him able to reclaim a bit of who he was.
This story would not be one of your stories, wouldn't be in your voice if there weren't a bit of family drama that comes into it. Tell us what happens, and tell us about the Ivy House. How does this place almost become a character in the story?
The Ivy House is Toby's kind of ancestral home. At the moment, it's just his uncle Hugo living there, who is dying of brain cancer. So Toby and his girlfriend Melissa moved back in there. But for Toby, this place is just charged up with all his finest childhood memories. He used to basically run wild there over all the holidays with his two cousins, Leon and Susanna. And for him, he's thinking of, picnics with wild strawberries. He's thinking of teenage parties and his first kiss and sleep outs in the garden and all these wonderful, magical things. so this is what this place means to him. It's a haven where maybe, because it's so full of his memories of himself before it all went wrong, maybe he can use those memories to stick the pieces of himself back together. But once they find themselves in the middle of a murder investigation, the detective's questioning is starting to peel back layers and to expose those darker sides that we were talking about earlier. And Toby's forced to realize that for Leon and for Susanna, the Ivy House isn't the same place it was for him. The memories that charge it up are not at all the same as his, and they're much darker and more complex and more fraught than his. And their relationship with him wasn't, from their perspective, what he thought it was. And so not only is his sense of self in jeopardy, but so is his sense of his past. That means destabilized as well. And the house, which is, like you say, it kind of pretty much is a character, goes the same way Toby did, from being this locus of stability and safety to being highly unstable and dangerous.
There's there's something that I found really interesting. Toby is suffering from a traumatic brain injury. His uncle is dying of brain cancer. Is there a thread there that you're purposefully connecting when with the two with the brain injury and the brain cancer?
Well, a lot of this book is about kind of self and what happens when the self is under threat or is damaged in some way. And for Toby, obviously, that's the brain injury and the PTSD. But for his uncle, it's the brain cancer, which in the same way is gradually eroding who he is. But for him, he responds to this attack on self in a very different way from how Toby does. There's a line where he says, one gets used to being oneself, and it takes some great upheaval to force you to look beyond the habit and find out what else might be underneath. And he uses the upheaval and trauma of the brain cancer and the imminent loss of everything that he is in order to find new things that he never knew he was capable of. And Toby isn't quite able to make that same leap and go, right, I'm going to find new things in this, what he considers to be basically the smoking rubble of his old self. And he's trying desperately to find ways to make that leap, but he doesn't quite. Or at least he does find new things in there, but they're probably not what he was hoping for.
Right. Tana, this book is absolutely amazing. It has really gotten to me deeply, and that's what you hope for in a book. You hope that a book stays with you and the characters stay with you long after you close the back cover on it. There's a link to it in the show notes. It's available everywhere. It's called The Witch Elm. Tana, thank you so much for taking time to come on the show today. If people are just learning about you and want to know more about you and dig into your back catalog and follow along for news, where can they find you online?
My website's tanafrench.com, and there's a Facebook page as well, Tana French, for just news and updates. And the books should be in good bookshops everywhere.
Excellent. Tana, I've really enjoyed talking with you. Thank you so much for taking time to come on the show.
Thank you so much for having me and for a really interesting books chat. Thank you.
Thanks for listening to the Author Stories podcast. For more great author interviews like this one, go to hankgarner.com and dig through the archives. There's something there I know you'll love. Now stay tuned for a special audio clip from Richard Gleaves' The Jason Crane series.
Hello, young one. What ghoulish tale of horror shall we explore tonight? Shall we watch The Creepshow? The Nightmare on Elm Street? Child of the night, give me your answer.
Which one would Mom kill us for watching? Said Buddy. Dad grinned and his eyes grew wide.
Which do you think, child of the jackal?
The Omen!
And we might have time for Omen too, if we hurry. She'll be home by 11.
I'll be back. Buddy ran to his room. He stripped down to his Yoda underwear and fished in the closet. 2 minutes later, he snuck back into the living room wearing his skeleton costume from last Halloween. He crept up behind his dad, who was cueing the movie. But David Rittermeyer was too clever for that. He spun around at the last moment and bared fanged teeth torn from paper plates, drawing a yip of surprise and a cry of, "No fair!" Daddy kicked off his Reeboks, plopped his smelly gym socks on the coffee table, another thing that Mom would hate, and killed the lights. The scary intro music began. The screen showed the silhouette of a boy, about Buddy's age. His shadow was a long, creepy cross. The Antichrist, the son of the devil. Born of a jackal on a night of astrological portent, destined to bring about the end times and the final battle of good versus evil. Buddy sipped Sunkist and scooted up next to his dad. As the movie got scarier, he slipped an arm through his father's and cupped his big bicep. Buddy could feel his father's pulse. Dads get scared too. They flinched together, shouted together, pointed at the screen and covered their faces together. Buddy pressed his eyes to Daddy's shoulder just before the on-screen maid shouted, "It's all for you, Damien!" and dove from the roof, hanging herself. Buddy knew which parts he was old enough to watch and which parts he wasn't. He trusted his dad to let him know when to look again. Occasionally, his dad tricked him into peeking too soon, but that was part of the fun. They kicked their feet at the screen and shouted, "Look up! Look up! Oh, idiot! Don't get yourself killed!" At the climax, the hero of the movie, Mr. Thorne, discovered a birthmark of 3 6s on his son's head and dragged the little Antichrist to the altar of the church, determined to spear his son with holy daggers and end evil forever. After it was over, the Rittermeyer men sat silently through the credits. David put an arm around his son and ran his fingers through Buddy's hair. He wasn't searching for devil marks. He knew there weren't any. And Buddy was certain there were no daggers in his father's hand, either. Those things were just make-believe. Real fathers and sons don't do bad things to each other. They were queuing up Omen 2 when the power went out. "No," Buddy whined. "Not on movie night." Daddy went to the window. "It's the whole block. Sorry, Damien. How about, scary blackout. Go get the Ouija board out of the guest room closet. Cool. And candles." Buddy found the Ouija board, hidden under old clothes. When he shut the sliding door again, the sight of a monster startled him, and he let out an involuntary, "huh" sound. It was his own skeleton-bodied reflection in the mirrored closet door. He stared at it. He liked the effect of moonlight on his cheeks. Spectral, haunted, his eyes big and white. He clacked his teeth at himself, picturing his own grinning skull under his child's flesh, and gave an evil laugh. He was answered by a scream. A woman's scream. High-pitched and far away. One of the neighbors? Buddy dropped the Ouija board into a patch of moonlight and sat with it. "What's going on?" he whispered, his fingers on the heart-shaped wood planchette.